You know, most UFO stories are just about weird lights in the sky. This is not one of them. Today, we're going to open a cold case. We're going to look at the 1996 Varginha Incident in Brazil, not as some piece of folklore, but as a forensic audit of a massive, catastrophic intelligence failure.
So right out of the gate, the source material makes this really bold claim. It argues this wasn't just some random crash. It was a catastrophic intelligence breach for what it calls the Archons, a hidden planetary control system. Think about that. The incident didn't just expose a craft, it exposed the whole system's vulnerabilities for anyone paying attention to see. All right, let's get our boots on the ground. We're going to the scene of the crime, Varginha, Brazil, back in 1996. We're going to walk through the timeline of this whole thing step by step exactly as it unfolded.
January 20th, 1996. That's ground zero. It kicks off in the morning. Both the Brazilian military and NORAD are tracking an unidentified aerial phenomenon as it comes down near the city. By the afternoon, we get the first survivors. 3 young women stumble upon this strange, frail-looking creature huddled in a vacant lot. Then, that very same night, a military police squad captures a second being. And this is a critical detail. Officer Marco Eli Chereze makes direct, bare-handed contact. Less than a month later, he's dead.
Okay, so now we shift from the what happened to the so what. We're going to analyze the occupants themselves, because the biological evidence, that's where the whole myth of alien omnipotence really starts to fall apart. What's so crucial here is just how consistent the eyewitness reports were. I mean, across multiple sightings, the description was exactly the same. A small, frail body, brown, oily skin, huge red eyes, and this really powerful ammonia-like smell. Notice what's missing from all these accounts. Any hint of threat or power. The word that keeps coming to mind is fragile. And this brings us right to the core indictment of the entire Varginha case. The craft crashed. That proves their hardware isn't perfect. It's fallible. The occupants were captured. That proves their bodies aren't godlike. They're biological and incredibly vulnerable. But their biological vulnerability, well, that introduces a kind of danger that nobody could have predicted. This wasn't a military threat. It was a biohazard, a biological agent that poses a direct threat to human health. So here's the absolute bottom line. The greatest danger from these beings isn't their technology, it's their very biology. The source material argues that simple, direct contact proved to be profoundly toxic to our physiology. It's not an invasion, it's a contamination. And the tragic case of Officer Marco Eli Chereze, well, he becomes Exhibit A. Remember, he made bare-handed contact. Within days, he was violently ill. He was suffering from this mysterious systemic infection that just baffled his doctors. They couldn't find a known cause, and his organs just started shutting down in a cascade. He died on February 15th, becoming the first documented human casualty of direct physical contact. Now, an event like this, a crash, multiple captures, a human casualty, that should be a world-changing story, right? But it wasn't. And that's because the system's response was just as revealing as the crash itself. A global cleanup protocol was activated almost instantly. And listen, this wasn't some panicked reaction. It was a protocol. A playbook. According to the source, it followed 4 very clear steps. First, secure the site with a massive military operation. Second, silence the local witnesses, basically through intimidation. Third, push out a cover story, and in this case, it was the absurd claim that it was just a local disabled man. And finally, step 4, exfiltrate all the physical evidence. Get it out of there.
And that exfiltration, it wasn't just a local affair. This quote from the source material is the smoking gun for international coordination. The creatures, one reportedly alive and one dead, along with all the debris, were apparently flown out of Brazil on a U.S. Air Force C-17 transport plane. The cleanup wasn't just local, it was global.
So what you're left with are 2 completely separate realities. The official story is, nothing to see here, folks, just a training exercise and a case of mistaken identity. And then there's the ground truth. Coordinated NORAD tracking, multiple credible eyewitnesses, the capture of 2 biological entities, and a dead police officer. The gap between those 2 stories, that's the size of the cover-up. And all of this brings us to our closing argument. You see, Varginha isn't just another strange story. When you really audit it forensically, it moves from being a simple incident to a full-blown indictment of the long-held myths surrounding this entire phenomenon. This table, it lays out the final indictment perfectly. The myth, invincible, godlike beings. The Varginha reality, they're biological and fragile. The myth, their technology is basically magic. The reality, their hardware is physical, and it breaks. The myth tells us that contact is some kind of wondrous, mysterious event. Varginha proves it's a direct biohazard. And, maybe the biggest myth of all, that these are just isolated events. Varginha exposes a global cleanup protocol, standing by, ready to deploy at a moment's notice.
So, the final verdict here is, well, it's unavoidable. Varginha is the smoking gun. It proves that the so-called gods can bleed, that their machines can break, and that their entire presence here is managed, contained, and concealed by a highly coordinated international conspiracy of silence. And that leaves us all with one final and pretty chilling question. The Varginha incident gave us a peek behind the curtain, but only because the system failed that day. It really makes you wonder, if this is the kind of response needed for just one crash, what else are they successfully hiding?